And we're here with Conor Ryan. Conor, what is up?
Evan, doing well. How you doing?
Doing great. Fresh off the Frozen Four. We were close on our predictions. I had Minnesota State beating Denver. Obviously, if the game ended after 2 periods, maybe that would have been the case. But nonetheless, it was not the case. Denver went on to win. The score looked bigger than it actually was. It was a very close game. But good times. You were there Thursday. I was there both days. And then you went down to DC, where you got to see the Bruins in person in DC. What did you think of Capital One Arena?
It's the loudest arena I've ever been to in my life. And it's like like the playlist, not great. It's like just EDM remixes of like Pitbull. Not you want to have, but it's also
Mr.
just
305.
It's so jarring just how loud it is. Like not just like the mix and like the speakers, which it's not like Vegas's arena where like the subwoofers are like underneath you. So you can feel it like that. It's just like blaring at all times. So like even the announcer who is a little bit more pep in his step in terms of like how he was announcing and like shrieking into the mic, but it's just something about, they must have souped up their audio systems, because I don't know how you could be a beat writer for that team and do 40 plus, maybe 50 games in the playoffs at that arena, because I thought I was going to walk out of onto the streets of DC afterwards and just have like a ringing in my ear the entire time. So it takes a toll, I imagine.
Yeah, like when you leave like a concert or a nightclub and you walk outside,
exactly.
You're like, what? I can't hear anything.
That's what it felt like.
Yeah, that's a weird thing I guess maybe if you grow up in that, you get used to it.
Yeah.
But that does sound kind of unpleasant for so much time. But who knows? Maybe it was just because it was a big Sunday afternoon matchup against the Bruins. But I think the biggest storyline going right now, and we will get to Torey Krug's return later in this episode. Someone asked I'll get to that later. I don't want to get too ahead of myself. But the biggest storyline facing the Bruins right now is back in net, right? We're back to square one in net, but in kind of a good way, right? In a weird sense, because on one hand, you have Jeremy Swayman, who was dominant when he came back from when Rask retired and Swayman was back in the net. Won Rookie of the Month in February, was outstanding. He's kind of fallen on some hard times in March and early in April, wasn't too terrific. And Ullmark was sort of the flip-flop, right? Ullmark was not so great in January, February. Now he's been on a hot streak. Even in that game against Washington, that game could have been very much more goals in favor of Washington. It was not, because Ullmark was making incredible saves with his glove, which, by the way, his glove has not looked great really a lot this year. It looked terrific on Sunday. And the question comes down to, granted, we're kind of far out from the playoffs. It's like 11 games right now, but it's coming up quick. Comes down to who would start in game one. And I saw this on Twitter. Bruce Cassidy said to Gresham Keefe on EEI. I hope this, by the way, is accurate, because they tweeted a picture of Mac Jones and Cam Newton with this tweet. So I'm hoping this quote is real. Bruins legends. He said, if you're thinking ahead to the playoffs, who would be the guy? We're undecided right now. Could be both. We're not sure yet. Who is the guy, or can they flip-flop?
If you ask me right now who would get the nod in game one, I think it has to be Ullmark. I think you just look at the way he's playing right now and the way Swayman's kind of struggling. I would imagine Ullmark gets first dibs, but I also wouldn't be surprised if they go into this with that tandem in net in terms of riding the hot hand and seeing how guys are dealing with it. And who knows, maybe it's Ullmark's in a groove. You don't want to disturb him and you ride that hot hand. But if he plays well in, one game, then struggles the next, maybe, Swayman gives you that extra oomph with the fact that he's back in the lineup. But it's such a tough thing to navigate, right? Because how many times do we see teams go into it with a game plan and it switches up, or you've got the narrative, all right, like, are you going to lose confidence? If you're a guy like Ullmark, for example, say he gets the nod in game one and struggles, and then you go right to Swayman. How does that, impact his confidence? Like, there's a lot of other factors that come into it when you are, going into the playoffs with this tandem in net. And it's something that you map it out and you put it on paper. You're like, oh, this could really work. These guys, they love each other. They give these big hug. Everyone's happy. Then you get into the playoffs and you get kind of a one game audition. You struggle a little bit, and all of a sudden you're not seeing the ice for the rest of the playoffs. It's one of those things it's definitely different when you have to navigate it over the course of, a playoff series. So if you ask me who gets the nod right now, I think it has to be Ullmark. Again, as you said, we've got plenty of time to see if a guy like Swayman can rebound and, get his game back in order. And it's a good problem for the Bruins to have, right? If Ullmark keeps on playing like this in this, stretch that he's in, he's your number one guy. You don't have to worry about it. But all of a sudden, if this competition brings the best out of Swayman, I think if you look at both of them, who gives you your best odds or gives you your best chance to win if they're both on their game, I'd probably lean Swayman, but you've got the luxury to at least roll with the guy who's giving you better returns right now in Ullmark. And if things go haywire, you at least have a backup option there. It's going to depend on where Swayman is at his game, because if Swayman's kind of the same player he's been the last few weeks, the last month or so, it's not a guy you really want to maybe turn to in the playoffs. Like, hey, I know you're struggling. Here's Carolina. Here's Toronto, right? Like,
you enjoy this
in the playoffs, like no pressure at all. So it's definitely a tough thing to navigate, but I would say Ullmark gets first dibs at least right now.
Yeah, again, Ullmark's more experienced. Like, I think that's another thing we're overlooking is like Ullmark is a veteran compared to Swayman, and maybe can step in there. I also think the other interesting thing from the other perspective is like from the coaching perspective. I think if you're going to flip flop goalies, right? Let's say in a series, you lead with Ullmark. He's okay in game one. You lose. Game two, he's not great. You lose. You put in Swayman. He's not so great in game three. You go back to Ullmark, and suddenly you're just flip-flopping and you lose the series. Suddenly, from a coaching perspective, you're getting questioned like crazy because that's a very unconventional thing to do. You don't really see teams do that with their goaltending, especially, teams like to go in with one set goalie. But, I mean, you look at the Islanders last year, and that, they switched off between their two guys. And I think it might be possible again, like if Ullmark carries you through round one, starts to trip up in round two, you put Swayman in. Like, I think there's a way you can do it. I think it just can't be like one game tryouts, right? It can't be like 3 goals on 24 shots, you're out, next guy in. So I think that's a really tough thing to kind of figure out. As I said last week, though, with a guy like Swayman, you look at the way he responded after getting sent down because of Rask's retirement and how he was so motivated by that. You do wonder if kind of not starting him game one motivates him. So if Ullmark starts to trip up, you can throw Swayman right in and it's all good. So interested to see how this plays out, because I don't quite know, because it's just been waves, right? They go for month stretches at a time. Maybe like Ullmark's month will be March and April. So then like May will start Swayman again. Swayman can have May and June. So we will see with all that. The other two, the other dynamic duo on the Bruins who are experiencing some struggles on the injury front, Hampus Lindholm and David Pastrnak, both out and have been out now for a couple games. Clearly a big loss. You see Pastrnak being out is a huge loss for the power play. The power play has been a shell of itself for quite a few games now. And then Hampus Lindholm being off that back end has definitely been difficult. When are these guys coming back? And how I think it's really showing how important these guys are for the playoffs, because if you're without either of these guys for any time during the playoffs, you're in trouble.
Yeah. And it's one of those things too, where you look at this point of the schedule and it's such not pointless, but it feels like you're just biding your time here, right? Over the last couple weeks of the season where, I mean, you still got seedings and matchups up for grabs, which are going to change pretty much every day, pretty much, because of the fact that these teams are so packed in points wise. But you just feel like you just want to fast forward, right, and get to the start of the playoffs. Because one, you're still risking injury where it's, other guys that go down with missing time. You look at Matt Grzelcyk, who's the latest guy, who they clearly missed him in that game against Washington. Don't know what his status is yet, but you hope it's something where he's not missing an extended stretch, because it looked like his shoulder when he left that game, which is not great.
Not fun, not good.
But yeah, you kind of look at the situation. I imagine if you're the Bruins at this point, I'm not fretting over, you need to get Lindholm in right away, or you don't need to rush these guys back, because let's face it, even though, probably there's some fans who still feel like Toronto's your best bet. And again, Toronto has a clear flaw in terms of their goaltending, but they're a good team, man. Like Austin Matthews is going off right now. It's not a team that you should take lightly, but you could also chalk it up to the fact that we're going to rest our guys and not really fret over who we're playing in the first round, because let's face it, it's going to be tough, whoever they play. Like, It could be Toronto, could be Carolina, which I think a lot of Bruins fans are not thrilled with that potential matchup. But also, Carolina's kind of dipped a little bit, and the Rangers are now surging too. So, are the Rangers a team you want to play in the first round? Which it's not a very good 5-on-5 team, so you could kind of exploit that matchup. But Shesterkin is Shesterkin; like he could win you series by himself. So it's pick your poison at this point of who you end up playing. You can make arguments for how the Bruins should be favored or how they can beat one of these teams. You can make plenty of arguments for how they are going to struggle in any of them as well. So I think if you're the Bruins, I don't think you're not going to see David Pastrnak. I don't think they're going to rest him, let's say, for the last 2.5-3 weeks of the season. But I also don't think you should be rushing these guys back. Like if he's good enough to maybe play in a playoff game, that's good. But wait till he's at least fully healed, or at least in a state where he's not going to be 70%, 80% by the time the playoffs arrive.
Yeah. We talked about this on Poke the Bear last week. Again, like prioritizing rest or not rushing guys back over playoff positioning. I mean, you're just seeing it every year and you see with the NBA right now. Like, it's hard to try to master where you want to slot up in the playoffs. Like, it's difficult to do. And I think, again, like as you said, right, the list of matchups: Florida, Toronto, Tampa, Carolina, New York. Like, are any of those ones where you're like, oh, that's who they got to play?
One, yeah.
Like, I think it's luck. Again, if you catch Tampa in a bad series, or you catch Florida or whomever, like, to me, it just comes down to luck on that end. And I think you put yourself in the best position to face these teams if guys are healthy, or at least close to it. And you saw, like, on Sunday, every time a Bruin went into the corner, you'd kind of wince because Garnet Hathaway would be flying in, or Tom Wilson, or TJ Oshie, and finishing a hit. And it's like, you don't need Carlos shaken up, or Grzelcyk shaken up, or McAvoy shaken up. He was shaken up after trying to lay a hit on Lars Eller in the neutral zone, or right in the top of his own end. So, all right. So this is the conversation I'm really excited for, because this is one we've not talked about this in a long time. There was a stretch in 2020 where all we talked about was Torey Krug, because it was questioned whether or not he should resign. He wanted to be back, but was he worth giving an 8-year deal to? Kind of all these different things. And he returns to TD Garden plays the Bruins for the first time tonight, Tuesday. So, if you're listening on Wednesday or Thursday, maybe he scored 3 goals, maybe he didn't do anything. I saw someone on Twitter say, like, should they give him a tribute video? And I was like, excuse me? Should they give him a tribute video? What do you think? The tribute video I want is for him at the end of the tribute video to take off his Blues jersey and have like a Bruins jersey on underneath. It just comes back, says I'll play for free.
Just hits Robert Thomas again.
Yes, he hits him on his own bench. Maybe they'll put that in the video. That would be pretty sick. But the question is, it's been almost 2 seasons now without Torey Krug, which is wild to think. Felt like that guy was kind of a Bruins lifer, but he comes back, and since then it's kind of hard to tell, right? Because I still stand firm in that he wasn't a great investment. 8 years, what did he end up getting? Was it 72 million? No, it wasn't 7. It wasn't 9 million a year. It was what did he get, 7 a year or 8?
I think 7, right?
It was, yeah, because it was like an 8-year, maybe $56 million deal. But again, the Blues came out
6.5.
Okay,
8 years, 6.5. Yeah, 7 years, 7 years, 6.5. So 7 years, 45.5.
7. Okay. So yeah, a little less than maybe we expected him to get, but still, it was like, I think 6 million was like the most we agreed on that we'd dole out to him. But he needed to secure the bag, right? So, in your estimation, how have things gone since? Because I think there are 2 camps. One, wasn't worth the money, but 2, what have you replaced him with?
Yeah, I think it's one where you can make arguments for both. I still think at the end of the day, when you look at how they've addressed his absence, I think they're in a good spot. I think one thing people probably are looking at now, just in the way things are trending, they're probably looking at that power play and his loss there, which valid. Torey Krug is a fantastic, power play quarterback. But I also think that you look at, where they're struggling, where it's, not moving the puck with authority and things like that. I also feel like you look at last year where Grizzly had a lot of those reps and that power play was still top 5. Like, I still think one way you could kind of tweak that power play is putting Grizzly back up there if he's healthy, because that's one thing he's very good at, is getting the puck and moving it right away and getting, the PK unit on their heels more or less. And it's easier to find that soft area of the ice where a guy like Bergeron can bury in the bumper, or you've got Pastrnak at his, in his office for the one-timer. So, I think you've missed him a little bit there, but you've got the personnel to, replace what you should be getting from Krug in that situation. And I kind of think now with Lindholm, it kind of assuages those concerns a little bit in terms of his presence out there. Not to say Krug would have been a top pairing guy here, but you've got Lindholm in place, and then you allow a guy like Grizzly, for example, let's say, to slot in with Carlo. And maybe that's the guy who's missed Krug the most, is Carlo, just because
for sure.
when they were on, they were so good together, especially, we've mentioned it plenty of times, but that cup run in 2019, that was their best all around D pair throughout that entire run. They were dynamite. So I think maybe the biggest area you probably miss him is just the leadership perspective. And he was, I think, such an important guy for a while, as being that guy that bridged that gap, right, between the old guard that have been there for a long, long time, the Bergeron, Chara, Krejci, to then you had this like big gap, and then you had, McAvoy, Pastrnak. He was kind of that middle ground. Now, obviously, Torey Krug isn't there anymore, but you kind of have populated that a little bit now with, Taylor Hall, Charlie Coyle, these guys that are kind of in that mid tier as well. So they at least have, accounted for that as well, but definitely a guy like Krug who everyone in the room loved him. You look at just his presence of what he brought to this team, he's definitely missed in that regard. But I think when you look at it probably from just the cold, business side of things, and in terms of what the production was going to be, he's still a very good player, but it seems like they've done a solid job with at least replicating what some of that production is, whether that's Grizzly or now Lindholm, which creates the opportunity for more guys to kind of move further down the depth chart on that left side of the defense.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think from the business side, they did the right thing. It just kind of came afterwards. Like,
yes,
because again, I don't think they had a set plan to move on. I don't think maybe they expected him and Chara to leave in the same off season. And I do think, again, you remember that left side going into last season. Who was it? It was like Grizzly. You had Zaboral there for a bit.
Yeah. Lozon.
So you didn't have much. So I think it kind of came down to, I think they expected Mike Riley to be kind of that Torey Krug-like player. He was last season, not as much this season. And then I think they kind of made up for it with the Hampus Lindholm thing. I think that kind of is like, all right, you don't really need Krug anymore. Because again, you have Grizzly, you have Riley, you have puck movers, and Lindholm can move the puck as well. So I think now it's good. I think that if we did this a year ago, would be saying there was no plan in place. Like, what was that? So I do think that, again, like, definitely missed, but nowadays with Lindholm and Riley and Grizzly and even guys like Forbert, you have depth on that left side, makes it look like a plan. And Ty was actually saying to me once, and I think he might've said this to you, that the Bruins kind of replaced Krug and Chara originally with Forbert and like Mike Riley. And you kind of look at that and you go, not great, but now you have Lindholm, right? And now you have, Grizzly's been stepping up a bunch. So I think it hasn't been, that wasn't like a total failure on their part. And remember how bad things got at the end of that contract negotiation, where like, I think it was Krug said in the Blues presser, he was like, yeah, they didn't even offer me. They rescinded their offer. I think the Bruins rescinded the offer. So really tough with that. And it stinks because he was a guy who should have won a cup here. Like, that was one of the people who I think should have won a Stanley Cup. And this year, I mean, I was looking, he's not super high. I think he's the second highest point total by a defenseman on the Blues. I think Justin Falk was like one more than him. Have you seen any of Krug this year? Is there any?
I mean, he's been as advertised. He's also dealing with injuries, so I don't know if it's even a given that he's playing. I think he's traveling with them on this road trip, which is encouraging. We hope he gets out there. But I think that's one thing you had to worry about with this long-term deal, a guy like that who, granted, he's built well. Like we saw in that Robert Thomas play, like he can throw his weight around too for a smaller guy, but it's still a lot of risk for a guy that makes his bread and butter in terms of his offensive production and staying in there and being kind of your offensive conduit for a job as demanding and as draining as, a top pairing defenseman, that adds up. So that's one of the risks you have to assume when it comes to handing it out to a guy like that. So still a very good player, still skilled. I'm sure he's a key cog in that room in St. Louis. But I think you look at just the Bruins, their long-term goals, it probably just didn't coincide with what they were looking for in terms of what Krug especially deserved to get for his payday.
Yes, deserved is the key word. I also think it's interesting what the Blues did where they let Petraglia go, but they signed Krug. And that was kind of a smart move. How it ended up actually kind of working out pretty well because now Vegas is tied down with all this money and might not even see him come the summer when the playoffs begin. But anyways, that is today's Bruins Beat. Conor, what can the people look forward to from you?
Yeah, we're going to have all of our usual coverage over at bostonsportsjournal.com. So all of the daily game reports, columns, previews, all that stuff will be over at BSJ, as well as some features that we're working on that we're hoping to drop pretty soon. So all that stuff will be over at bostonsportsjournal.com. So please subscribe. If you want to follow me on Twitter, you can do that at ConorRyan_93.
Go do all that. For CLNS Media, I'm Evan Marinofsky. You Bruins Beat listeners, have a great rest of your week.